Danielle Pletka is the Vice President of Foreign Defense Policy for the American Enterprise Institute. We're also joined by James Zogby. He's the founder and president of the Arab American Institute. Thanks to you both for joining us. Mr. Zogby, we'll start with you. What do people of the Muslim world think of the United States?
Well, you know, we did a poll back in April, and it was really quite interesting because we asked a series of questions about the various ways that America manifests itself in the region. We asked how they felt about the American people, American products, American television and movies, and American values like freedom and democracy and education. And what we found was very positive numbers in the Arab world and then in the non-Arab Muslim world. Where we found the negatives were when we asked about American policy toward Palestinians, American policy toward Iraq. Better numbers when you ask about American policy on Bosnia, American policy on Kosovo, and the liberation of Kuwait. Kuwaitis obviously were 98% favorably inclined toward American policy there. But it was the policy. It's the policy that drives the numbers down where they are bad.
Ms. Pletka, would you agree?
No, not really. I can't argue with numbers because it's hard to argue with numbers, but clearly the perception of the United States in the Arab and Muslim world is negative. I guess probably where Jim and I would part ways on this is more what we should be doing about it. My argument is we should be who we are, because that's what's great about the United States. You know, selling ourselves is tough. You shouldn't be out there trying to sell yourself or corrupt your policy in order to sell yourself. What you should be doing is doing what's right. And if people don't like you for it, unfortunately, that's tough.
One of the reasons that we invited our two guests to join us today because the United States is launching a campaign, a media campaign, designed to improve the United States' image in Arab and Muslim countries. There is, along with this campaign, several commercials tied with it. We want to show you one of those commercials right now.
I believe American people in general respect the Islamic faith.
Hello, my name is Abdul Hamouda. I'm the owner of Tiger Lebanese Bakery located here in Toledo, Ohio.
My name is Dr. Ali Zerhouni. I'm the director of the National Institute of Health in America. What I can tell Muslims around the world is the tolerance and support I've received myself is remarkable. I was totally embraced by the people here, my professors. Everybody told me, well, we're all immigrants here. We're all from different places, and we all meld together, and I love that.
My name is Farouk Muhammad. I'm a paramedic for the Fire Department of New York. I have co-workers who are Jewish, who are Christian, Catholic, Hindu even, all different faiths. They've all been very supportive of me since the 9/11 attack, and I've been very grateful for that.
My name is Rabia Ismail. I'm a school teacher in public school in the United States of America. I wear a hijab in the classroom where I teach. I have never had any child that thought it was weird or anything like that. Islam in the United States could be followed just as well as I can follow in my village where I was, raised. You can do it. In my neighborhood, all the non-Muslims, I see that they care a lot about family values, and just as much as I do. I didn't quite see any prejudice anywhere in my neighborhood, after September 11.
Hi, I'm Devyanti Farid. I'm a master's student majoring in broadcast journalism at the University of Missouri in the United States. The majority of the students work as reporters, producers, or anchors for news breaks here. So while I'm learning, I can also work at a real television station. Good morning, I'm Devyanti Farid. Thanks for waking up with us.
The notion that science can improve health has been borne out in Islam for many centuries. Some of the best doctors in the history of the world have been Muslim doctors.
Dr. Zerhouni.
The American students that I have met have respected my beliefs. It's nice to know that Americans are willing to understand more about Islam, and there is an opportunity for mutual understanding.
I've never gotten disrespected because I'm a Muslim. We're all brothers and sisters. Here I am as one human taking care of another.
Religious freedom here is something very important, and no one ever bothered us. Since 9/11, we've had an overwhelming sense of support from our customers and clients. America is a land of opportunity, of equality. We are happy to live here as Muslims and preserve our faith.
Danielle Pletka, your response to that ad?
Well, it's lovely, it's warm, it's fuzzy, but this isn't what's going to sell us. What we're competing with in all of these countries are state-owned organs of the media. In other words, the state-owned press, the state-owned television, and those amount to, in large part, propaganda against the United States. You know, seeing this isn't going to make people say, wow, everything I've read every day in the newspapers, everything I heard in school growing up through this anti-American curriculum is wrong. Americans really are wonderful. That's why I really do think that it's a misguided effort to try and sell us this way. What really sells us is policy, and it's standing up for the right thing. And in these countries, I think standing up for the right thing in many ways means saying that the education system is anti-American, that there should be the kind of freedoms that we enjoy in those countries, that their governments should provide the things that we enjoy here. You know, in countries where we stand for those things, Iran, people like the United States a lot more.
Mr. Zogby, would you agree that this campaign reflects the wrong thing about the United States?
Well, you know, Danielle's not going to argue with me about numbers, but the numbers are that in Iran, they really don't like us. They don't like our policy. The fact is that in Arab countries, younger people like us a lot better than older people because the educational system is quite different than she thinks it is. Let me tell you, I think that the ads actually tell a good story. They tell the story of tolerance, but people already know that. The news about problems that exist here is real. I mean, there is discrimination. There was a backlash. But many institutions in America stood against the backlash, and people know that. This is not a bad idea. I'm not sure that we need to be spending money to do it. I think that, contrary to what Danielle thinks, that the issue is Arab media is open to our message. I have a TV show on one of the Arab networks. There are about 15 competing cables or satellites in the Middle East, all of whom are open to actual co-productions with American companies. NBC has, PBS has, other networks here have done things with networks there. They want to know more about America. That's why people in those countries come here. That's why people value our freedom and democracy, and the numbers don't lie. People like what we are. They want us to apply our values, and where they get angry with us is not for any reason other than the fact that they don't see us applying our values to the policy issues that matter to them. If we supported freedom and democracy, why not for Palestinians?
Yeah, and why not for Iraqis and Iranians and Saudis and everybody else, I would ask. But let me agree with you for a second, because I think that would be nice. I actually really do agree that we do not sufficiently exploit the opportunities that we have in the Arab media. What I would much rather see us spending our money on, instead of Radio Sawa and these kinds of ads, is us trying to get our diplomats on foreign TV, to see them on the local networks, in the newspapers, and everywhere else. I think if you get on the terrain that you need to be, rather than trying to open up entire new markets, then you really are making your argument.
We're not only going to agree on that, but I'm going to do you one better. It's not just the diplomats that need to be on. I mean, the good thing about the advertising is actually ordinary, everyday people. I mean, the fact is that American Muslims, Arab Americans, need to have more opportunity on these networks. And where the American government can help, I think, is creating something like a corporation for public diplomacy, a private enterprise initiative that would be supported by the government, but would help take advantage of openings that exist that we're not currently using. Instead, people had this idea that we should invent some state-run American vehicle that simply doesn't make sense.
We agree on that.
Let me put you on pause for a second. Say that we have one of 4 lines you can call in on this morning. 202-585-3881 if you are our line for Democrats. 202-585-3880, our line for Republicans. 202-585-3882, everybody else. We also have an international line this morning, 202-585-3883. Please, we also would like to hear from you if you are an Arab American or a Muslim American. And feel free to call in. We'll take calls in just a second. So you both agree on this advertising campaign is not the right way to go. You disagree on some other things. You talked about trying to get more spokespeople on and trying to get some representation on media that would be primarily affecting their world. Would that do us well?
I don't know that it would do us well, but at least we would be making our arguments. I think the fact that we are running our own propaganda arm is is not necessarily as effective as it should be. Apart from being expensive, which it is, it's not playing on their field. It's trying to open up a new battleground, which I think is enormously difficult and can then be clearly identified as what it is, which is, in essence, yes, a good thing, but American propaganda. If we're fighting on the local networks, even on Al Jazeera, which isn't necessarily as popular as people think it is, but on others as well, on Egyptian television, on all the other networks, then I think we're fighting on the right ground. Now, Jim and I are going to disagree till the end of time about policy, because I think that, we answer on policy to our own constituency, not to a constituency in the Middle East. And if they don't like us for it, it's unfortunate. But the point that we want to make in this world is not that they shouldn't not like us for it, but that they shouldn't want to be terrorists as a result of it.
I'll let you get the last one before we take phone calls.
Well, the issue about our policy is that it doesn't reflect our values, bottom line, and it doesn't reflect our interests either. And when we look at the frustration that exists in the region, look at the question of Palestine, for example, they're watching every day people very much like them being brutalized, and they're being brutalized with our support and with our actual more than support.
Come on.
I'm not going to come on because it is a very deeply felt issue. And frankly, if you think you can change attitudes without reflecting a concern about policy, turning a blind eye to what means most to them is simply not going to help. And I think that's an issue that we have to take into consideration here.
Let's take our first call. Newport, Vermont, on our line for Republicans.
Yes, hi, thanks for taking my call. Like most Americans, I like to think that I judge people as individuals and not because of their color or creed. I have to ask Mr. Zogby, however, about this Muslim. I don't know much about your faith, but I do know as a Catholic, if I got a group of my most radical Catholic friends and ran a few planes into the Pentagon and the World Trade Centers and did it in the name of the Catholic faith, that Pope John Paul II would be on national TV in 10 minutes disavowing us, and that priests all over the country would not be taking up collections for the families of the hijackers, they'd be doing collections for the families of the victims. How do you answer to the lack of response from the hierarchy in the Muslim faith disavowing these actions?
Well, first of all, I'm Catholic too, and so that we share something there. But let me tell you a little bit about what Arab Americans and Muslim Americans did in the aftermath of September 11th. We actually have a booklet that we published at our institute. It's a fairly thick study called Healing the Nation. And if you go to our website, aaiusa.org, you can find a copy of it. You can actually download it free. Muslims across the country did denounce. Muslims across the country did raise funds for the Victims Fund. I had a cousin who was one of the first responders, a New York City police officer. There were dozens of Arab Americans and Muslim American police officers. They've now formed even a Muslim American police association in the New York City Police Department to make it clear that they were part of the rescue effort. There are Muslim Americans and Arab Americans, cousins of mine, who are in the U.S. military who were part of the war against Afghanistan and will be a part of any other conflict that America gets into, because we've been in this country 100 years and fought in every one of our wars, and this is our country. And so those guys who attacked the buildings, they attacked our people. And Arab Americans and Muslim Americans responded as Americans to this. So don't confuse for a minute what your perceptions might be about what some have said in the Middle East. The fact is that people here responded quickly, and responded forcefully to condemn what was a barbaric attack against the American people.
Austin, Texas, on our line for Democrats. Go right ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm from England, and my parents saw some of the ads that was run across the Middle East and some other Arab countries. The main reason people outside the United States hate this country mainly is the policy, American policy towards the Middle East, especially towards the Palestinians. We are going after Iraq, trying to disarm Saddam Hussein. The Israelis have the same weapons that we're trying to disarm Saddam from. Why is it that America, they're very open to Sharon? He visits this country on daily basis. And we watch the Israelis kill innocent young Palestinians, throwing stones every day. We equipped Israel. It's just the policy in the Middle East and the policy around the world. That's the main hatred towards this country.
Danielle Pletka.
No, a couple of points. First of all, the idea that there's any moral equivalency between Saddam Hussein and Ariel Sharon is ridiculous. When we talk about U.S. policy, what we're talking about is countries that represent a threat to us. And Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them is a threat to us and to our allies. Israel having nuclear weapons, whether or not they do, and many argue that they do not represent a threat to the United States. That's number one. But the more important point here, and this is really where I actually would like to hear what Jim has to say as well, is on the question of why we are so desperately concerned about the Palestinians. And let's say that we should be rightly concerned about the plight of the Palestinians. But why are we not also concerned about the plight of all of the people throughout the Arab world who do not live in freedom or democracy? Why aren't we concerned about Palestinians in Lebanon who by constitutional law are not allowed to own property, are not allowed to intermarry, are not allowed to carry passports, are not allowed to marry? You know, I mean, it's not right. And I guess what I fail to understand is, if we're so desperately sympathetic toward these people, why are we not sympathetic to them throughout the Middle East? Why do we really only care when Jews are involved?
Mr. Zogby.
Well, the issue is that the question of Palestine is the core issue. It is the nub of the problem facing us. It is the dividing point between us and that region. All of our polling indicates that, and anecdotally, I can tell you the same as well. The fact is that there are other problems in the region. There's no question that there are other problems, and we have to get to those. But not unlike peeling an onion, you go layer by layer until you get to the core. The fact is that as we begin to address this issue, you take what is most central to the concern of the people there. And in the polling we find, and in the conversation we find, it is the issue of Palestine. It is the measure of how we deal with that region, how we treat the Palestinians. And frankly, ignoring it is grave danger to our own interests and to our influence in that broader region. You know, and it's not just
that we ignore this, though, as a matter of policy.
Well, it is a question of the fact that we ignore it, because what's happened over the last year has been devastating, not just to the Palestinians, but also to the United States and our ability to influence, to have influence in the region, and also to our allies. Look, I've met with senior diplomats, American diplomats serving in the region. I've met with senior American military officers dealing in the region. And you know what they say? They say, this problem is harming us because we're not dealing with it well. And they're very concerned about a war with Iraq without us addressing the issue of Palestine. It is a real problem, and we've got to face it.
I'm going to come back to you on that one.
Tampa, Florida, on our line for Republicans. Go ahead.
Hello. I just want to know why I saw like 2 months or 3 months ago advertisement about Saudi Arabia. They were with us. I really didn't care about that. I feel offended when I saw it, because whatever they do here, I don't care. They need to war over there. And the Arab people, every time that we see somebody who is attacking or is a terrorist, I don't see anybody from the community Arabian condemning these people. I just see them quiet. I think they need to war, and they need to war in their countries to change their mind, because they are still a little primitive. Thank you.
What's the impact, in the larger sense of the question, what's the impact of American media in the Arab Muslim world?
You know, it's interesting. When we poll, we find that, I guess I'd put it this way, more people in the Middle East are watching CNN than are watching it here. Actually, American television is watched very widely in the region, and most of the networks that are there actually have American programs translated into Arabic or with Arabic subtitles that show they like American television.
It is a product. Baywatch, Jim.
Pardon?
You're talking about Baywatch.
I'm actually not talking about Baywatch. I'm talking about a whole range of programs. I remember we had this public diplomacy conversation in the Council on Foreign Relations, and people were saying, we need to have them watching Meet the Press. And I said, look, they're watching Meet the Press. It's in the package of programs that you get when you get a satellite arrangement in the Middle East. There are networks there that carry American programs, news programs, entertainment programs. And you know what the most popular program in the whole Middle East is? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It's an exact rip-off, not rip-off, but it's a syndicated franchise of the Regis show. The guy wears the same cheesy suit, it's the same set and the same music, and then spin-offs of that are equally popular. And American movies are very popular, translated into Arabic with subtitles.
No wonder they hate us.
They don't hate us. You know, you may hate us, but they don't. They actually like the values of America, and they like our culture.
So which
is why they keep coming here.
So when you have to,
I mean, my family came here and still wants to come here because America is a great country. People love it. They just want our policy to reflect our values.
How do you sell policy like what's going on with Iraq there without them coming at it with a large dose of suspicion?
Look, this is the problem. This is the way you framed the question is the problem. We don't need to sell our policy. Okay, our policy is based on the American electorate, not the Arab electorate. Our policy is based on doing what's in America's national interest, not what's doing in Saudi Arabia's national interest. We have to do what's right, and then we need to do a good job explaining it. I don't necessarily think that we do the best job explaining it overseas. And again, I think we wouldn't disagree. We disagree about the policy, but even then, even if you disagree about that, we don't do a good job explaining it. And one of the reasons why is because our public diplomacy, I think, is sort of misdirected. But in terms of Iraq, you know, there's no question that throughout the Middle East, nobody likes Saddam Hussein. Nobody thinks well of Saddam Hussein. What they want to know is, why are we doing this? They want to see good arguments. They want to see good explanations. And maybe in the end of the day, they won't agree with us.
You know,
but at
Danielle,
least we make the effort.
It's interesting that in the Middle East they think that we're not operating according to our policy or our interests, but Israel's interests. And not even our electorate. Because the issue is that if we are leaders, then we have to have people following us. Then our values have to reflect themselves in our policy so that other countries will follow us. And it's not just, if you look at today's paper, it's not just the Arab world that's upset. It's Europe that's upset with our policy. It's many of our allies in the world right now who simply don't get us. And if we think we bully our way to leadership, at some point we're going to turn around and find nobody there. I believe that if we didn't have a policy that was so one-sided toward Israel, we would in fact have a better chance of achieving peace for Israel and the Palestinians and be more respected in that region. And that's where we ought to be.
Positive policy towards terrorists, I guess, because that would make us more beloved.
South Wales, UK, go ahead.
I'm basically amazed sometimes at how some of the representatives think that we're not on the same line. They think basically that when it comes to being just, right? Iraq invades Kuwait, the whole world shake, America invades, live to liberate Kuwait. Since 1967, Israel have invaded Palestine, have invaded Lebanon. No sanction whatsoever has ever been respected by Israel. And this injustice still goes on and on and on. I am a British Muslim, and I've got a lot of friends from Iraq, from Jordan, and they hate the American policy because of that injustice that still goes on up to this day. No except the Clinton government that tried to actually reach peace. The Bush administration, as soon as he came in, right, stood with Sharon on every step of his invasion, of the slaughter, of the killing. As long as that goes on, the Arab people will always hate the Americans because there is an injustice that goes on and on and on. Thank you.
First of all, it's one thing to hate America, and it's another thing to seek to blow up Americans in airliners, in buildings, and wherever they may be. This is the problem, the distinction between hating us and wanting to kill us. You know, you can disagree with us till the end of time, but the desire to come and commit acts of terrorism is really part of the problem. On the question of President Bush coming in on Israel, let's have a little bit of history here. At Camp David, the Palestinians were offered the most generous settlement, one that was not supported necessarily by many people in the United States who are pro-Israel, the most generous settlement, which they walked away from. Arafat then began a campaign of terrorism in which women and children were blown up because they were women and children who were Jewish in Israel. Now, we cannot have a policy that is equal towards a democratic government and towards a government that employs terrorism. Are there tactics that Israel uses that are unacceptable? Yes. Are there people who are innocent civilians, bystanders who die? Yes. But as far as we are concerned, Israel does not deliberately pursue a policy that with terrorist tactics.
We will agree. Terrorism is deplorable, and I condemn it. Palestinians made a horrific mistake using it. But the fact is that there's a mythology about Camp David and the aftermath, and you reflect it very well. It's a fanciful telling of history. The reality is that Arafat wasn't offered the most generous deal. In fact, Barak withheld quite a bit, and it would have been fatal for Palestinians to have accepted basically living in little Bantustans, which is what they would have gotten. I think President Clinton did the right thing at the very end of his administration by offering something much better. But there were only about 3 weeks left, and he simply could not sell the deal or close it in a short period of time. I think if the president had offered his package a lot earlier, we probably would have seen a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. I also think if the Bush administration had picked up right where the Clinton administration left off, we'd be a lot closer. But look, there are a lot of mistakes that were made, and I think that there are mistakes on all sides. But the fact is that none of it excuses today the fact that we have taken the kind of posture that we've taken, that basically ignores the reality, the centrality of this issue to our interests. I want to argue this from the perspective of the fact that America needs friends and allies in the Middle East, and America needs its values reflected in the Middle East, and America needs peace and stability in the Middle East, and we're doing very little. If we think that it's going to be us and Israel against the region, we're wrong. And I think we make a big mistake. And I really would like to see us take a different bent.
We're taking a look at the Muslim world and the U.S.'s image in the Muslim world. One of 4 lines you can call in on this morning. Love to hear from you also if you are an Arab American or a Muslim American or an Arab or Muslim and wanted to get your thoughts on the United States image. Our next call, Lincoln, Nebraska, on our line for others. Go ahead. Lincoln, Nebraska, are you there? St. Thomas Virgin Islands is up next. St. Thomas, are you there?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm an ex-United States military personnel. I'm living down in St. Thomas right now. And I get appalled when I hear, especially this young lady on here, talking about United States foreign policies. There's no real fair foreign policies when it pertains to people of darker color. I mean, a lot of Palestinians get killed constantly. You know, and the United States need to look at a broader picture. Why has this happened? There's nothing fair-based. Matter of fact, there was a meeting in South Africa a week before the September 11th bombing, called a World Racism Meeting, when the United States delegates and Israel delegates walked out on that meeting. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, there's police profiling on black Americans in America, and that's not what a total democratic country supposed to do. Why don't you speak up on issues as that on injustice among black Americans and their injustice on reparations on Africans worldwide and the United States government or Israel don't even want to speak of it? Did she answer that?
I'm not sure that I'm equipped to answer you. With all respect, I disagree with everything you said, but I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on racial politics. I will say this, and I hope that Jim will agree with me. Our policies in the Middle East have nothing to do with anybody's color. You can disagree with them, you can agree with them, but they don't have to do with color. As to the racism conference, I don't even want to begin to get into that. That's a long and a completely different topic. But I don't believe that color factors into any of this. We're talking here about national security and national interest.
Wilmington, California, our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Pletka, I wish I could hear you speak for a half hour or so. It sounds like you have a lot to say that I'd like to know. I agree completely that this is kind of a propaganda program instead of a diplomacy program, a policy program that we should be focusing more on. But in the United Nations Security Council, the open meeting that was held about 3 weeks ago, seems like every Arab leader that got up to speak and sat down in a seat had something to say about other countries not holding to security resolutions, meaning Israel, of course. So the Israel-Palestinian issue is on the mind of the other Arabs, but I don't think we do ourselves any good when we have, like, Harry Fleischer talking about a 5-cent bullet would solve our problems in Iraq, and other things that George Bush said on the campaign trail, to rally his base. If Arabs see all of this, then no wonder they don't like us.
I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, although thank you for the flattery. It made it all worthwhile. Did Ari Fleischer make an off-the-cuff comment that was in poor taste? Yes, he did. On the other hand, I don't think that what President Bush was saying about Iraq was trying to rally his base. I think what he was doing was going throughout the country and talking about something that's very important, as he sees it, to our national security interest. I happen to agree with him. But we're talking about American electoral politics here. We're not talking about how he reaches out to the Arab or the Muslim world. So I think those are two very separate things. I guess I don't really see the problem. Everybody says something that isn't perfect at one time or another. I know I have. I imagine Ari Fleischer is a victim to the same problem, but it doesn't really affect what we're doing overseas.
Mr. Zogby, will Israel always be the stumbling block, so to speak, in regards to our image in the Arab world?
Actually, no. And I think you saw a tremendous. I was in Casablanca shortly after the Oslo signing and the White House signing, when they had the first regional economic summit. And it was really quite extraordinary to see how quickly the region could open up to cooperation and an effort to see a different future with Israel when they saw Israel opening up to a different future with Palestinians. It was the fact that the situation soured within a couple of years. By the time you had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu being elected in '96, you saw settlement size increasing as rapidly as it did even during the Rabin years. You saw Palestinians economically being damaged by the policies that were put in place. The result was people soured, and you had a going back to the kind of frustration and hostility in the past. But no, there is the possibility of peace. Look, when the Arab League met in Beirut during a very difficult time, and no doubt you remember, Danielle, it was during the incursions into the West Bank that were taking a terrible toll in Palestinian life. Nevertheless, the Arab League met and passed a resolution making it policy to recognize Israel, to normalize relations with Israel on the condition that a Palestinian state be established and Israel get out of the West Bank and Gaza. That was an important statement in principle. People want to maybe jiggle about the language, but nevertheless, the fact is that there is now an Arab resolution on this matter, and I think that it points the way to the future.
You don't see the irony in the fact that in what year was this? 2001, right? That they had this meeting.
It was 2002.
Was it 2002?
Yeah.
Sorry. That in 2002, more than 50 years after the creation of the State of Israel, we're all excited by the fact that the Arab world agrees to recognize the existence of this state. That's what you consider progress?
What's really interesting is that what you don't want to acknowledge is the fact that Palestinians have been living under a horrific regime in the West Bank and Gaza occupation, and that from 48 to 67, there was the problem of the forced dispersal of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Look, you have an interpretation of history. Arabs have an interpretation of history. Someplace in the middle might be truth, but the reality is that people are allowed their feelings and their hurt and their pain. Jews have a history of hurt and pain, and everyone has to understand it. Palestinians have a history of hurt and pain, and it ought to be understood as well. We cannot have a conversation if the conversation is based on
Let me leave
deafness.
you right there. Let's take the next call from Chicago, Illinois.
Yes, I wonder if Mr. Pletka has ever read a book called The Great Heresies by Hilaire Belloc in the 1930s, in which he predicted that Islam would make another run at the West around the year 2000.
Who would take another run at the West?
Belloc, he was a contemporary of Chesterton. And he also said that Islam is really a Christian heresy and not a new religion. Thank you.
I'm afraid I've confined myself to Hilaire Belloc's poems for children. I think his views on religion were not polite, to say the least. So I can't comment on that.
London, England, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm just calling because I rarely, for years, have watched the Palestinians suffering terribly. I can't believe that in this day and age there's one country left where they talk. I know suicide bombings are terrible, but you go and look at how many children and women and men have been blown up in Israel by gunships, by armaments, by weapons from America, and Sharon being called a man of peace when we know he's a man of war, he's an army officer. And my husband was in the army in Israel, in Palestine, in 1947, where English soldiers were murdered and hanged on trees, and Camp David Hotel blown up by Jewish people who were bringing in arms illegally as well, and they were called terrorists. And I think Sharon started the suicide bombings by walking up to the Temple Mount with hundreds of soldiers around him and shooting dead innocent Palestinians with stone throwers.
Mr. Zogby.
It's a terrible and frustrating history, and it goes way back. You're right, it didn't start in 48, it started during the mandate period, and it simply hasn't gotten better. We had a brief moment, I think, during the 90s when it looked like it was going to get better, and I still think it can. I mean, I was on the White House lawn, and I don't think it was puppy love. I mean, I think it was a real sign that Arabs and Jews together want a different future, and that with American leadership they can find a different future. The point is that what we have to do is be fair. We have to be fair to both sides and recognize the pain of both sides and the fear of both sides and provide them the strength to move forward. If you take one side and you pay no attention to the other side, you know what? It's going to be a soup that ain't going to work. And so that's why I think that we need a correction in our policy. My point to you today is that as we're looking toward Iraq, as we're looking toward our relations in the broader region, and as we're looking toward a public diplomacy campaign, to ignore the fact that the thing that is on their mind, which is Palestine, and to ignore it, and to ignore the fact that people are feeling pain and we are not paying attention to it, is a recipe for disaster with our efforts at building a coalition against Iraq and with our efforts at building a public diplomacy campaign. If you don't pay attention to what people are saying to you, then ultimately they're not going to hear you when you're talking back to them.
I'll allow you a quick response.
Jim, the problem I hear in the formulation from this lady and that I keep hearing from you is XYZ, but suicide bombings are okay, are bad, but. And the point here is not suicide bombings are bad, but, or that terrorism is bad, but. It is that there are problems, but terrorism is an unacceptable answer.
I agree.
So, but that's never the formulation.
But it is the formulation for me.
It's utterly, well...
It is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. Period. It is unacceptable. And the policies pursued by Israel are no buts. Both sides, and that's why American leadership has to be different. We have to be able to say to both sides the same thing.
Let me get another call in. Greenbelt, Maryland on our line for others. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Albert. I'd like to weigh in on the discussion, and I think that one of the things, well, if you allow me less than a minute, I think I can make my point. It's amazing to me that we've never had George Bush Jr. say anything about New World Order, and everybody's contending with this fear of the World Trade Center getting bombed in the most secure country on the planet, and all we seen was Arabs getting on a plane, where we have had the Mossad, who has celebrated the death of many Americans by having these remote-controlled planes flying these buildings, and then over in Israel, you have Israeli Defense Forces blowing up their own buses saying Palestinians did it. And no full account. I swear, I hope that C-SPAN goes to Iraq to be able to fully inform the world about the truth before they create some kind of hypothetical, who God knows what, to say, oh, well, Saddam Hussein didn't cooperate, and the only true news agencies we have in the world are C-SPAN and is Al Jazeera, if you can speak Arabic.
Ms. Pletka.
Oh, come on. I'm not going to dignify this with an answer.
Next call, St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. I totally agree with the gentleman that's on your show. I feel that the government is not listening to the people, and that is why all these things are happening. And it's not only happening in the Middle East, but in many countries, when you're trying to force your policies that does not meet to what they stand for, you're going to have that kind of attitude. And I watched the lady talking, but I see that she is not really listening. I don't think she really cares about listening, to what what people needs are. And that is the big mistake that America is making around the world.
Ms. Pletka, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I didn't appear to be listening. I have at least listened to you. Look, we listen throughout the world. The point about that is that we do not do what everybody wants us to do. That is not what the policy of the United States is about. Our policy is about doing the right thing. It's about supporting our own national interests. And in the case of Iraq, it's about our own national security. In the case of Israel and the Palestinians, we are among the #1 donors to the Palestinians. It is the United States that has done more to try and bring the Israelis and the Palestinians together than any other country, Europeans or anybody else. But we will not bring together a country that's one country that is a democracy and another that uses terrorism as a means to articulate their political views. That's part of the problem. When they abandon terrorism, I think the United States needs to do everything possible to try and bring them together. But terrorism cannot be a tool of foreign policy for anybody. We do listen. I don't think you're right.
Part of the reason that we have our guest here today is that we're examining the role of the image of the United States in the Muslim world. The United States government has undergone a media campaign in order to make that effort known. It involves a series of commercials. We have one to play for you right now.
I believe American people in general respect the Islamic faith.
Hello, my name is Abdul Hamouda. I'm the owner of Tiger Lebanese Bakery, located here in Toledo, Ohio.
My name is Dr. Eli Zerhouni. I'm the director of the National Institute of Health in America. What I can tell Muslims around the world is the tolerance and support I've received myself is remarkable. I was totally embraced by the people here, my professors. Everybody told me, well, we're all immigrants here. We're all from different places, and we all meld together, and I love that.
My name is Farouk Muhammad. I'm a paramedic for the Fire Department of New York. I have co-workers who are Jewish, who are Christian, Catholic, Hindu even, all different faiths. They've all been very supportive of me since the 9/11 attack, and I've been very grateful for that.
My name is Rawia Ismail. I'm a school teacher in public school in the United States of America. I wear a hijab in the classroom where I teach. I have never had any child that thought it was weird or anything like that. Islam in the United States could be followed just as well as I can follow in my village where I was, raised.
You can do it.
In my neighborhood, all the non-Muslims, I see that they care a lot about family values, and just as much as I do. I didn't quite see any prejudice anywhere in my neighborhood, after September 11th.
Hi, I'm Devianti Farid. I'm a master's student majoring in broadcast journalism at the University of Missouri in the United States. The majority of the students work as reporters, producers, or anchors for news breaks here. So while I'm learning, I can also work at a real television station. Good morning, I'm Devianti Farid. Thanks for waking up with us.
The notion that science can improve health has been borne out in Islam for many centuries. Some of the best doctors in the history of the world have been Muslim doctors.
Dr. Zerhouni.
The American students that I have met have respected my beliefs. It's nice to know that Americans are willing to understand more about Islam, and there is an opportunity for mutual understanding.
I've never gotten disrespected because I'm a Muslim. We're all brothers and sisters. Here I am as one human taking care of another.
Religious freedom here is something very important, and no one ever bothered us. Since 9/11, we've had an overwhelming sense of support from our customers and clients. America is a land of opportunity, of equality. We are happy to live here as Muslims and preserve our faith.
Let's go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Oh, yeah. Good morning, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, please. I'm from Ghana, West Africa, Ghana, but I'm U.S. citizen. Something bothers me when I hear a lot of people talking bad about Americans and the Jewish and the Arabs. I really feel bad. Okay, first of all, I think that most of the time we have to, individually, we have to accept our own fault than to blame it on somebody. Okay, let me give you one or two examples. When I look at about 2-3 years ago, what happened in Africa, Kenya and Tanzania, innocent people were dead. Look at what these brothers, our brothers, Arab people, has been doing to, let's say, American people that live in other countries. Okay, let's see what happened 9/11. Even apart from that, they have tempted so many times. Let's see what happened 9/11. And our brothers in Middle East, a lot of them were happy about it. My point that I'm trying to make is, I'm not against anybody. I'm trying to say the fact. Why? What is the Arab nation doing to themselves to help our brothers Palestinians? Because anytime I hear anything, kill Americans, kill the Jews, what are our brothers? Because I have a lot of, Middle Eastern friends, which are Muslims and Christians. But my point is, why is it that they hate Americans so bad? Right now, I'm American right now. Imagine that I go to Middle East with American passport. I'm scared. What are they going to do?
Caller, we'll leave it there, Mr. Zogby.
You know, Arabs are equally afraid to come here with Arab passports, and the treatment they get is difficult. There is a deep divide that's opened up between our two worlds, and it is frightening and it is wrong. And I don't think it has to stay open because, as I said, in the polling that we've done, we find that people in the Arab countries like the American people and, in fact, condemn those who committed atrocities against us. They also like our values, and they also like our products, and they like so many things about us, but they don't like our policy, and they think our policy is against them. Let me just do a little shameless self-promotion. There's a book here called What Arabs Think. It's based on polling that we've done in 8 Arab countries, and you can get it from Zogby.com, Zogby.com. It's a polling company that is run by my brother John Zogby that does domestic polling but also international polling. And what you find in the polling is that the Arab world likes the American people. What they don't like is our policy. And what we find here is the same thing, is that the American people like Arabs and like Islam and have favorable things to say about it, largely because our president, I think, provided some real leadership after 9/11. But they're concerned about what the policy of the Arab people is as well, and how the Arab people feel about Americans. And so with this deep divide, the TV advertising isn't enough. It isn't the right thing. I think more effective is direct people-to-people encounter. And, you know, some of the programs that were run by USIA, the old USIA, the kind of visitors program that brought people from the region here and that brought Americans there, are very important. Fulbright programs are important. Personal exchanges are critical at this point, and I think we really need to find ways to close these gaps. Changing our policy will be important, I believe very important, but equally important is having people meet people and get to know each other in a better way than we've been able to do, and that we can do through these advertising campaigns. More cost-effective, too.
A couple things. You know, again, we agree entirely about this, I think, and I agree people-to-people exchanges are very positive and much more meaningful than these kind of ads. But let's talk about what the caller said, because I think it is awfully interesting. When you talk about what people in the Arab world are doing for the problems that they perceive, what you see is that what they're doing is directing their anger at the United States rather than trying to do anything positive. There are all these confabs that you see among the Arab League and among Arab states in which they pledge money and support to the Palestinians, and in fact what you see is that the person who seems to be most interested in giving money to the Palestinians is Saddam Hussein giving $10,000 to terror, or $25,000 to terror-suicide bombers' families. What I also want to point out, because I think it's important that it be part of the discussion, is that September 11th, the terrorists who were involved in September 11th weren't concerned about U.S. policy in the Middle East. They hate the United States because they hate the Western values and they hate the freedoms that we stand for. This had nothing to do with U.S. policy, and that is a group that has a growing amount of support. And that's also a problem. I don't think that has anything to do with our policies.
Next call up, San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Hello. I would like to make a comment. Before I saw the commercial, the advertisement, I was thinking precisely that in such a heated and emotional issue, people have to get past the so-called facts or history because it is so emotional. Everybody's going to view a fact from their point of view and from their own feelings. I wonder if that advertisement is able to be seen by the Arab people in the different Arab Emirates, because I think that would go a long way. It's not the only thing that has to be done. It would go a long way to at least let people start thinking, well, okay, maybe U.S. is not everything that we hate. Maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm very concerned that the U.S. is always at the forefront when something happens in the Middle East. I think it should take a step back, let the UN and Kofi Annan worry about what action is to be taken when there is a Middle East crisis. Maybe that way the U.S. gets away from being always the focal point of anger and the focal point. If you eliminate U.S. in the middle, maybe a lot of people won't like what I'm saying, but at least, then, okay, so if it's not the U.S. putting sanctions against us, or it's not the U.S. reprimanding us, then who are they going to, blame? And who?
Excuse me. Any responses?
Yeah, let me take a crack at it. I think that a lot of what is in the ads is well-meaning and is done by good people. My question is the cost effectiveness, because it is answering questions that people aren't asking, and it's telling them something they already know. The fact is that if you look at Arabic television programs that are available in the Middle East, not the news at the top of the hour, but the daily programs that are available, including the ones that are produced here. Many of these Arab TV companies actually have programs that emanate from here in the United States and tell pretty much the same story that is available in the ads. People know that Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are doing well. They probably need to be reminded of it, and it's not a bad idea to do it. The question is this the way to do it? But on the question of policy, we really have to take a look at hearing what people are saying to us about what matters most to them. And in that regard, I agree with you. If we put ourselves in the context of an international consensus, we would do better. We would do better if the United Nations took the lead on some of these issues. We would do better if we weren't as vulnerable and as exposed when, in fact, our moral authority to lead is as compromised as it is. It's difficult for us to say that we want UN resolutions enforced when, in fact, people in the region look at us as a country that flaunts resolutions when they don't matter to us and when we don't care about them. When we want to supply Israel with weapons that kill Palestinians and then only condemn one side and not condemn both sides, then in fact it compromises us.
Danielle Pletka.
And so I really think that you have your finger on a problem, and that is that our values are not reflected in our policy, and that's what people are saying back to us.
Ms. Pletka, how much was spent on these ads, first of all?
It's in the millions. The entire campaign. I don't know how much per ad, but our entire campaign of public diplomacy in the Middle East is moving up, not just into the singles of millions, but into the tens, and I think in the future into the hundreds of millions. And I think Jim and I both agree that it's probably not money well spent. I want to go to a point, because I've already argued with you about our moral standing, which I think is very good. But to the point about whether we're in the forefront, the United States, if we don't stand for something, we stand for nothing. The idea that we should withdraw into ourselves and cede the foreign policy to some world government or some international institution that isn't representative of the American people is the pure definition of isolationism. And I don't think isolationism is good for us or for our national interests or for you, the caller.
I want to work on a few more phone calls. Virginia Beach, Virginia, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. This question or comment, if you want, is addressed to Mr. Zogby. Mr. Zogby, I come from Yugoslavia. I'm Serb, and I grew up with the Muslims. Whatever you are talking about, how good the Muslims are, intentions are good, and so forth, it's a total lie. The thing that you ought to address here is that it's not the U.S. has to change its policy. It's the Arab people and the Islam itself that has to change its policy. It ought to stop living in the 2nd century. And it's up to Arab governments to change and re-educate their people, to accept the Westerners, not just to talk about the Westerners as the evil people. And you yourself, being a prominent person in this country, ought to use your time to propagate, that policy rather than, rushing up, the Muslim literatures and so forth. I'd like to hear your comment. Thank you.
Well, listen, number one, there wasn't an Islam in the 2nd century. Number two, I think, the conflict that Serbia had, that the Serbs had with the Muslims itself, on both sides, people were going back to pretty ancient history. The problem is people use a lot of these ancient historical myths to justify their arguments. Both the Jews have done it, Christians have done it, and Muslims do it as well. The problem is, how do we get out of the mess that we're in right now? And I think that you can put religion on the back burner if you want to look at that for real and look at real issues, real problems that need to be solved today. Does Israel need to be secure? Of course it does. Do Palestinians need to be secure and have an independent state? Of course they do. Should we end the violence of the Israeli occupation and the terrorism that Palestinians are engaged in? Of course we should. And so the question is, how do we do that? And I believe that we do that by not supporting one side, but by looking at ways to support both sides and have a policy that is balanced and crafted to meet the needs of peace on the one side and American interests and values on the other. We have come up short because our values are not reflected in our policy. It is, as Danielle says, our domestic politics that's reflected, and that is not enough to create a policy that works.
Our last call, Washington, D.C.
Good morning. I'm calling as a grandmother with 3 little girls living in D.C., and I live 14 blocks from the Capitol, so I have a great feeling of indebtedness to the people who brought the plane down in Pennsylvania. But having said that, what I am very troubled by is trying to be the constituency that Ms. Pletka is talking about, that our policies reflect the constituency. I'm very troubled by trying to understand this situation. On the one hand, I have Ms. Pletka saying that Arafat turned down the most generous offer he possibly could have refused, and it's his fault. But Mr. Zogby says, no, it was not really that generous because they were going to live in a little, whatever he said, I forget the word. And I'm looking at this and going, what is the right thing here? How can so many people feeling so angry at us, how can we just ignore that? On the other hand, what is national security, and why aren't we going to war with North Korea if they've got a nuclear weapon capability farther along than Mr. Hussein, who I think is horrible? And my last point is, what is terrorism anyway?
Goodness, you've asked a lot of difficult and good questions. If you're looking for people to agree all the time, you're going to be very dissatisfied. Look, all the United States can do is stand up for what it believes in, and the same goes at a national level and at an individual level. We believe in liberty. We believe in our values, and what we ought to be doing is standing up for those, not on a case-by-case basis. We should be trying to offer the fruits of liberty and democracy to everybody. That doesn't mean going to war and deposing every leader who disagrees with us. What it does mean is openness. It means freedom. It means trying to bring democracy to the Arab world. On the question of North Korea, we're going to be facing some difficult choices. Right now, the president wants to try diplomacy, and I think that's the right thing. With Iraq, we've tried diplomacy. We're on our last effort, and I hope it succeeds, but I doubt it. We've got to stand up for what the people of this country need, and that is in our best national security interest, unfortunately.
Danielle Pletka is the Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy for the American Enterprise Institute. James Zogby is the founder and president of the Arab American Institute. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Coming up on Washington Journal tomorrow, we will have former Attorney General Richard Thornburg, who will discuss his role as the WorldCom examiner and talk about his preliminary report on WorldCom's business and accounting practices that was issued last week. We will also hear from Curtis Gans from the Committee for the Study of the American Electorate. He'll talk about his new study on the voter participation for the 2002 midterm elections. And we will also hear from the Reverend Mel White and Gary Nixon. They are going to discuss gay activism, their organization's Soul Force, and why, as a couple, they moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, and took a house across from Jerry Falwell's Baptist Church, and why they are protesting the Catholic Bishops' Conference this week. Thank you for watching Washington Journal today. We'll be back tomorrow at 7.
You're watching C-SPAN, created as a public service by your cable TV provider.